I'm Adam Simmons with Project Geospatial, hosting the Geospatial Frontier Virtual Technology Fair. In this session, we're getting an inside look at Kleos Space. And with that, I'd like to introduce Karyn Hayes-Ryan, who will interview the CEO and the chairman of the board of Kleos Space. As many of you know, Karyn recently retired from the U.S. intelligence community as a senior executive for 17 of her 31 years. She served at the National Reconnaissance Office as deputy of the IMINT, now GEOINT, Directorate and Deputy Chief Operating Officer, as well as many key engineering positions. Karyn also served at the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency as their Deputy Chief Engineer, Director of IT Oversight, and the agency's Component Acquisition Executive. Now I want to turn it over to Karyn, in which she will continue with the panel diving into Kleos Space.
Thank you, Adam. I'm Karyn Hayes-Ryan, and it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Andy Bowyer, the CEO of Kleos Space, and the chairman of the board, Mr. Peter Round. Gentlemen, if you could each take a moment or two to talk about yourselves, tell us a little bit about you and your position in Kleos.
Thanks, Karyn. It's great to be here. So really pleased to be part of this program and this initiative during this time of lockdown from our homes. Hopefully won't get disturbed by too many children throughout the process, but it's live, so we'll see. So in terms of my background, it's very much space focused. Been working in the space industry since 2005, where I started a space engineering company with my business partner called Miles Ashcroft, who's CTO of Kleos. A couple of years ago, we had been developing some really interesting technology and formed a business around it, formed a business plan, which we called Kleos and brought into Luxembourg, where the business was started. So my background is very much space orientated and of late really moving towards the defense security sector as we take this exciting business forward, using space to collect data and deliver into a wide range of markets.
Peter?
Great. Well, thank you very much, Andy and Karyn, for that, and to everybody out there. It's really good to be part of this presentation today. Yeah, my background is Royal Air Force, United Kingdom Air Force, where I was a pilot, and there'll be a special prize for any of the questionnaire who can identify the aircraft sitting, let's try and find it for you, sitting there, which is just a little competition as we go ahead. But my life was spent in the cockpit flying, and when I wasn't doing that, doing military capability development and international defense relations. So 2 tours in the United States, a tour with NATO, and an operational tour in the UK's permanent joint headquarters, and time commanding in the field in Saudi Arabia. Eventually led me to Europe and to Brussels, to the European Defence Agency as the capability director, trying to get 27 European Union countries to think about defence capability in a collected way and do it in a way that enhanced rather than competed. And we did research and technology, research and development, as well as straight capabilities, everything from air-to-air refuelling aircraft through to small pieces of soldiers' equipment, swarming vehicles, and space. After that, I went and became a consultant working for the Luxembourg government on a defence relations strategy. And from that, I got involved in interviewing companies with a defence output, one of which was Kleos Space. And I thought the capability using new space, using innovative technology and delivering a capability that wasn't really available to a wider commercial sector was incredibly exciting. So I joined the company. And it's been a couple of years of an exciting ride of going through producing satellites, getting ready for launch, and being in a position where we're soon going to create data. And this is unique. And couldn't be a more exciting part of technology as a whole, but particularly with new space. Karyn.
Thank you, Peter. Andy, where did the idea come from to create a Kleos constellation? And what does a Kleos constellation look like?
So over a number of years, as I was talking about in terms of the introduction, at the company Magna Parva in the UK, we've been working on lots of scientific instruments. So these are sensors that go into different planets, going to different parts of the solar system, looking out, looking in. We worked on instruments and sensors for Earth observation, which is where you fly satellites in low Earth orbit to look at the Earth and see what's going on, whether they're weather satellites or a wide range of different types of sensing. And over those years, we'd started developing a particular technology which was deploying antennas in space to collect data about the radio transmissions that were coming from Earth, where we could geolocate those radio transmissions. It's called RF interferometry. We'd worked up a number of different ways of going about it, using large deployment systems, very large satellites. But over those years, the whole space industry had changed. The capabilities of small satellites had massively improved. The reliability of those small satellites had improved. So where previously you needed satellites of 100 kilograms plus to deliver something useful from a data perspective, we were able to deliver something from less than 10 kilograms from a sensor on a satellite. So we developed a series of technologies, ground-based technologies, to do this RF interferometry, this sensor technology, over a number of years, which then started to build up with a business plan related to being able to finance and buy our own satellites that could deliver a capability. So where previously the space sector, as the defense sector and a lot of these industries, you did a part of the chain. You either did the hardware or you did the downstream application. You were able to, through generating venture capital by bringing money into the business, you're able to control the whole chain. So this was the business model. It was to develop the technology, to buy and own our own satellites, to put the technology on, to use that technology to deliver a capability, and to be the people that were delivering that data to the customers. So it meant that we could then control the complete value chain and grow the business in a way that we wanted to grow it. It meant that we could sort of loosen the shackles, if you like, of some of the more traditional space industry and deliver something that was much quicker, much more reactive, much more responsive to customer needs. So that's really where the business came from in terms of the process over a sort of 4 or 5 year period before it became a true company in its own right in 2017, which obviously then gave us the vehicle to then raise money into and all those fun things like going out and raising money.
So Peter, you mentioned earlier some of how you got involved in this. Can you explain your very active role as the chairman of the board?
Yeah, well, I do like to be part of the things I get involved in. So I think some chairmen of the board do spend their lives in oak-lined offices and leather chairs, but it's not quite like that for us. We're a startup. We're small. We're only 15 people. We're spread across the world, United States, mainland Europe, UK, Australia, and South America. So there's a small number of people with an awful lot to do and an awful lot of responsibility on all our shoulders. So my role is twofold. First is fairly traditional chairman of the board. We are a listed company, so there's a role in making sure that we operate in a way that's correct and suitable for the sort of company we want to be, which is about honesty and integrity. But my second role is the business development side. We are 15 people, but of those, the majority are engineers and scientists, and they have a particular way of doing things, a particular language they speak, and a thirst for perfection, a thirst for engineering excellence, and all those things are quite right. My job is more as a practitioner on the other side, a user of the information. What's important? Is it that the information is perfect? Is it that the information is quick? What should that information look like? How should we use it? Where might it be used by, in particular for me, a defense customer or a security customer? And I spend my time both interfacing with the possible users of the data, but also interfacing with our designers and saying, that's great, but let's make it look like this. Let's make it usable. Let's make it so it interfaces. Because in the end, it's all about making our information useful and easily digestible for the customer. A defence organisation the size of the DoD, or in the UK, the MOD, is not going to change its systems to take our data in. Our data must fit what they need. So that translation piece is really important. Karyn.
Thank you, Peter. Either one of you, could you describe for us the Kleos business model and the market?
Well, why don't I cover the business model, Pete, and you can cover the market.
Okay.
So in terms of business model, what we are doing, as I was talking about before, we are owning, operating satellites, developing that capability, collecting data, processing it through our algorithms, and then selling that data as a service. What that means is that we are providing through a pipe or an API, as it's technically called, through a pipe to our customers' platforms, through our customers' screen, we will be providing points on a map, geographical references of where we are seeing RF transmissions, RF communication type activity, and we're providing that in a geolocated way. So longitude, latitude, the type of frequency that we're seeing and when we're seeing it. So it's a very simple data set, but what it enables is the GEOINT user to be able to start plotting that against a map, but then also to start layering that up with other data sets. So obviously from a maritime perspective, our data is very interesting if there's an absence of AIS. So there's an automatic layering there of the RF geolocation, the AIS geolocation, but then also starting to bring in other data sets like imagery or synthetic capture radar imagery, where you are able to actually see what is happening. So this kind of tipping, queuing type exercise where we can say, okay, well, we're seeing the presence of a radio transmission. There's no AIS there. Let's bring up an image, see what's going on. Speeding things up for the analyst. That's a really key part of our business model in terms of how we add value as a company. What we're not doing is that analysis ourselves. We decided as a business model that we would work with partners. There are lots of companies out there who are exceptional at intelligence provision, at analytics, at data aggregation, at integrating different data sets to deliver a solution. And what we're doing is we're partnering with those people to help integrate our data into their provision, to add further value to their capability for the end user. Whether that's a government aggregator, such as the NGA, etc., or whether it's a commercial aggregator, we'll work with those organizations to help integrate our data and deliver a value-added solution for the analyst and for the end user. So this is where we're sitting into the marketplace. Our model is to be a responsive sensor suite, a responsive capability, a responsive data set. So we will launch more satellites to deliver more capability over a period of time to react to what the customer needs us to have. So it's a very key part of our business model to be reactive, responsive, and deliver a wide range of services into a very, very key important part of the market, which Pete can highlight.
Okay, Andy, thanks very much. Yeah, so I divide our market into three sections, really, which is defence and security, regulators, and commercial. So those first two are both government, but they're different sectors of government. But and I'll come to that in a minute. But just to take what Andy has said, what are we actually doing? Well, we can geolocate a radio transmission. We can give a long duration and something about the signal strength. And we can do that independently of the vessel or the transmitter, and we can do it without the transmitter knowing that we're listening. Now that brings a huge amount of value. There are plenty of systems around, particularly in the maritime field, which is where we're starting, which tell us where ships are. But those do require some involvement from the vessel. That they require the system to be working. It's always a good start. It has to be switched on. And if left alone like that, then you get the information you need, and the information we derive from seeing the transmissions will show that the AIS position and where we think the vessel is are about the same, in which case we can move on. But we also know there are parts of the world where these systems get switched off. They get spoofed. In other words, people pretend still transmit, but they're not transmitting the correct information, or they get jammed completely so they can't be seen. And there are pictures around of certain parts of the world with the legitimate picture and the analysed picture, and you can see that there are hundreds more ships out there than people thought there were. We also know that ships disappear over the horizon, and when they come back over the horizon, they might have met another ship, transdecking of cargoes, of people. All this happens beyond the sight of land and without being necessarily being able to see be able to be seen by other systems. So the defence and security market is pretty obvious there. We can add to an intelligence picture, bring another layer into that picture. There may be visual sightings, there may be human intelligence, there may be AIS that we've talked about, there may be land-based radars, aircraft. All of those bring a part to the picture. But we can bring another layer into that picture, which forms a confirmation of it being there. And in defence and security terms, the more data you've got, the more intelligence you've got, the more you can compare with, the more reliable your picture can be. Moving on to regulators, though, why would regulators want our information? Well, fishing, a number of reasons why. Fishermen sometimes don't particularly want their location to be known. They will fish in areas where, or might fish in areas where they're not allowed to fish, where fish stocks are being protected. They may fish more ships or vessels in an area than they're allowed to ship. And there are all sorts of things going on in different parts of the world of defeating systems which might check where a fisherman is fishing. You can add into that polluters and others who may pollute and not admit it, and when pollution's found later, it's impossible to track back to who caused the pollution. So there's a whole raft of regulators who want to take our data. And of course, those regulators may be government, but they don't necessarily have access to some of the data that defence has got, so they can't necessarily share the same picture for a whole lot of good reasons. And in both those circumstances, we may find there are multinational coalitions going on where the information shared is much better to come from a commercial source than to come from individuals, countries, methods, which again they sometimes want to protect for themselves. In the commercial world then, a third area, it's good to know for shipping owners to know where their ships are, to know where they've gone. If they've been insured to operate in a certain area, have they stayed within the limits of what they're allowed to do? Have they shaved the distance from a coast a little bit and put themselves at risk perhaps of piracy or other sorts of action? So what I'm driving towards here is there are a whole range of different areas where the information is useful. And just to go back to the defence scenario, if you can give a better picture, if you can show that a piece of ocean has activity in it, if you're going to use another sensor, be a synthetic aperture radar, be it a photograph, whether that photograph is taken by a satellite or whether it's taken by a patrol aircraft, if you can send the sensor to the right place first time, then you can save time, you can get the information quicker, which is very important, but you can also save money. Just think of the saving of a 10-hour maritime patrol aircraft sortie going out to an empty ocean, then having to go again to do another 10-hour patrol to find a piece of ocean where there's activity. If we can direct straight to the place where there's activity, then we've made the whole process more efficient and safer for the crews. Karyn.
Thank you, gentlemen. At DGI in London earlier this year, one of the few conferences that wasn't canceled, the Five Eyes leadership, Australia, Canada, UK, New Zealand, United States, those leaders spoke of the need for industry to form partnerships and come together as partners to address the government with joint solutions rather than individual companies coming in and addressing parts of solutions. What do you look for? You both mentioned some partnering ideas. What do you look for in a partner, and what type of partnerships is Kleos in?
I think we see ourselves very naturally as a partnership type business. You know, the whole Earth observation marketplace I was just talking about, Earth observation, particularly in the ISR domain, is a very natural sort of patchwork quilt of capability. It's essentially different sensor suites covering off different parts of the spectrum, whether it be imagery, video, SAR, RF in our case, etc. So there's a natural capability or natural alliance between those different data sets or sensor suites to come together and deliver a wider capability. You then start to fold around that the analytic capability. So those people that have got the very clever AI algorithms, machine learning algorithms, the ability to take these massive data sets together and actually pull them into something which is a solution. So I think there's natural partners there that both in terms of our alignment in the EO world, but then also in terms of the data aggregators, the data integrators. Some of those people that are collecting data are also data aggregators and doing some analysis. So we have a wide range of different partnerships with both analytics companies, but also other data sets that we come together as sort of best athlete teams to suit a particular customer requirement. So I think that's naturally how business wants to operate. I think that particularly where in small companies terms, we can start to fulfill a much larger requirement for a government customer by working together rather than working as individuals. I think that's absolutely the sensible way to do it. I'd also say it's also very cost effective from a customer perspective, because rather than paying for one very large entity that has lots of overhead and is covering costs in different areas, no matter what the project or customer requirement is. In this case, where you're putting together more virtual teams that are coming together on almost an ad hoc basis to answer a particular solution, then I think that's a much more cost-effective, much more reactive thing for government customers, and ultimately more cost-effective for the taxpayer in that sense. So I think it's a positive thing. It's something we encourage. We have lots of partnerships across the world in a lot of different areas in order to enable those teaming agreements to happen on a case-by-case basis. I think the thing that we want to probably avoid is by making those too fixed or too permanent, you're then driving the cost back up again. So what they want to be is they want to be fairly flexible teaming agreements. And I think that's something we're encouraging at the moment.
Okay. In which orbit would this first cluster of satellites fly? I understand it's not a polar orbit.
No, sorry. So these first satellites are flying in the 37-degree inclined orbit, which means that they are covering up they go as far about Lisbon in Portugal, is about as far north as they go, and Melbourne in Australia is about as far south as they go. So they're covering off many times a day the key sort of areas of the world where there's a large amount of maritime traffic, where there's a large amount of challenges around the world. So whether it is from a smuggling, illegal fishing, potential illegal activity perspective, these are the key areas that we're looking at. So it's a good orbit to be in from a perspective of what we're trying to do. It's not ideal for all satellites to be in this orbit, but it's certainly fantastic from a defense and security perspective. Specifically, I think it's a good place to be. Peter, I don't know if you want to pick up on any particular areas of interest that are interesting from a customer perspective that you've noticed.
Yeah, thanks. I certainly think the orbit we've chosen is because it's where the hotspots are. And if you take two key hotspots in the world, or three perhaps, take the Mediterranean, the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz and the South China Sea, those are three areas where there's significant nefarious maritime activity going on. And anything that can add to the picture, particularly the picture of those who don't want to be seen, is of the most interest. And that's what we've chosen to do with this first cluster of satellites. But it is a first cluster of satellites. We will follow on with more clusters of satellites, and we'll design future orbits to cover the gap. So we can increase, go to a higher inclination. We can go into a polar orbit in the future to develop a crisscross, and we can adjust how our orbits work as to where the satellites are relative to each other. So you can see a picture perhaps with only a few minutes delay between pictures, therefore giving you some time delay capability, which is really, really useful. But it's a matter of the great bonus and benefit of new space is being able to choose and change these types of orbit quite quickly to manage the hotspots of the world. At some point, of course, the poles are, as climate change affects how the poles and the amount of shipping in the poles, they're really important. But we also feel that today's intelligence interest is those areas I've described. And by having that, the orbit we've chosen, you get a really good revisit rate and therefore a top quality information flow. Karyn.
Thank you, gentlemen. So Kleos will fly in clusters of 4 satellites. What is their formation? Is it static? And what advantages are there to having 4 satellites in those clusters?
So no, the satellites aren't static with relation to each other. So they fly about in a particular formation. They're approximately 100 kilometers apart, each pair, but they are moving as they go through their orbit. So they are furthest apart as they are passing over the equator, and then they come closer together as they're passing over the top of their orbit. So the formation has to be designed in such a way that it's flying optimally over the main areas that we're interested in, where we can provide the best geolocation. To state the obvious, the further apart that they are at a particular point within reason, then we can geolocate with more accuracy. And that's what we're trying to provide to the customer, is a very accurate picture by having 4 clusters, 4 satellites in a cluster. So we optimize our satellites and our constellation or our cluster to fly and deliver the best possible capability over those key areas of interest that Pete was highlighting there, so that we're delivering the highest value data to the customer, where it's also the most accurate from a technological perspective. So the 4 satellites delivers a few different options there for capability. The 4th satellite delivers us some contingency. We can do some maths and geolocate transmissions with 3 satellites. The physics allows for that. The 4th satellite allows us to geolocate it with theoretical more accuracy, but it also allows us, if we have a satellite failure within the 5-year lifespan, then we've still got a capability that is able to deliver an output for the customer. So it gives us some fail-safe capability there. So that's very, very useful for us. The other thing it does is it's able to start to geolocate from a 3-dimensional perspective. So we can start to approximate some altitude of the transmission. Not hugely interesting from a maritime perspective, as you can imagine, but where we're starting to develop is applications, not just in the maritime environment, but on the land environment and also the air environment. So can we start to tell whether a transmitter is in the air or on the ground? That could be interesting from a customer perspective. And we want to be able to start offering more capability as we move forward beyond that of just a simple 2-dimension geolocation.
Okay, thank you. As a startup that is caught up in some launch delays completely out of your control, how do you finance your current activities and begin the build out of a second cluster?
With difficulty, it's always a challenge. I mean, there is no, as everybody knows, there's no easy money out there. There's no money tree that startups go and can just get money off that startup tree. I think we have been very, very well supported by our current investors. We raised a lot of money in Australia in 2018 in order for us to launch and procure our first satellites. Obviously, with delays, we've had to put in some bridge financing in place there. We've been very well supported throughout that whole process to get us through to that early revenue stage. we are or will be in investment raising again. We'll be looking to put more financing in place to grow out the constellation, to grow the business, to grow the team specifically is very, very important for us as well, which we fairly urgently need to do to get a lot more support staff and a lot more engineers in place that we need. So we're working through a range of different things. COVID has been deeply unhelpful. I think it's hard to feel too sorry for yourself because there's guys out there that are a lot worse off than we are, and we're all well, we're all healthy, we'll come out the end of this and move forward. We've still got an extremely strong business case. We've got a great team in place. We've got good satellites that are ready to go. So yeah, we've been delayed and look, we lose sleep over it, but I think you've got to look at how lucky you are in the grand scheme of things, and we still work on that basis.
Okay. How can the government assist new space companies like yourselves?
Well, it's a good question, and I think that one of the things that we have been very keen on doing and trying to promote within governments is the concept of being an anchor customer, for instance. So what we mean by that is a customer that will actually buy the product that you're developing, buy the output that you're creating, so that you can use that to raise investment. Because if you're able to show a business case, if you're able to show that you generate revenues from your capability from early adopters, which the government has the capability of being an early adopter in a lot of these senses. If you can show that capability, you can raise money against that revenue. It's a much simpler ask in that sense. Whilst you're in a position where you're trying to gain grants or other financing or other investment from the government, that's less helpful actually in the fundraising aspect of trying to bring private money into the company. So the best thing for businesses, in my view, from a new space perspective, is really to encourage through placing of contracts to deliver real output. These are not contracts for the sake of things. These are contracts for data that the government actually needs and wants. So we're delivering value to the government, but just moving a little bit quicker than perhaps sort of traditional industry might do, able to just support businesses by being that early adopter. I think that's a really key thing. Pete, is there anything else that I've missed there, do you think?
No, I think you covered it. I think a government, that this type of product and how a government works is an ecosystem. You have academia and research scientists and the extremely clever people, if you like, in a country, any nation, working hard to come up with new ideas and new capabilities, and their defence and security type ideas like ours is. Then it's a mix of those ideas coming out of the brain power, the scientists and the engineers, and then being able to help that process forward because government supports the idea, makes it so it can happen in the regulatory environment, makes it so the particular government spreads the idea, advertises that capability is happening in its country, and when the defence security agencies of a country use that product, then it's an endorsement of quality, and we see this happening so well in many countries where the defence economy, academia, ecosystem is just that, all helping towards GDP. And where we are at the moment with some plunging economies, then that type of support is exactly what companies need to move forward and to move forward in the international world. Yeah, I think that covers it.
Excellent, thank you. My final question, and probably the most pressing question on everybody's mind, is when do you launch?
That is certainly the most pressing question. Yeah, I think the current situation that we're in is that the satellites were shipped to India. We're launching on an ISRO PSLV launch called C49, which is a fantastic launch capability of PSLV. We are shipped the satellites there, ready to the launch site. Our team was there, ready to go. And that's when the COVID-19 situation really kicked in. India shut its borders, closed its hotels, its airports, and everything. All transport ground to a halt, and they took the steps that they thought they needed to take in order to react appropriately to protect their citizens. No argument there. Did cause us a problem though, because that obviously meant that the launch capability at that point was delayed. So where we are currently is we are looking for India to come out of that lockdown, and then as soon as India's come out of that lockdown, then they are very keen and pushing hard on getting the launch up as quickly as they can after that period. So it's we are obviously not in control of both the pandemic itself, nor India's reaction to that, and which is, as everybody expects. But we're tracking regularly. We're very well supported by our colleagues at Spaceflight, who do the launch program with ISRO. And so we're as a team, we're working very hard on getting up as quickly as we can within the confines of we have to wait for India to release some of the lockdown measures.
Okay, thank you. I'm getting pummeled with a lot of questions for you, which is good news. And if there are some that we can't get to because of time constraints, I'm sure that we can, when Adam takes the video and puts it and hosts it on the Geospatial Frontier site, that we can maybe answer some of those additional questions as well if we run out of time. So the first question is, what business partners can you talk about are you connecting to correlate with their data? Are there imagery providers and other layers of data that you're incorporating?
Slightly different answer to the question there. We wouldn't pull out any specific imagery partners, and the reason for that is that we think that there's a fantastic range in the high resolution or the lower resolution but higher revisit rate type capabilities, and there's many partners we're working with from an imagery perspective. However, what we're not doing is integrating their output into our product. That's not our world. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we are well aligned with their needs, and if they are offering a broader analyzed output, i.e., an image layered with, if you like, an RF geolocation capability, then we're partnering with them to deliver against a customer requirement or a government requirement. But we're not doing it in the sense of we're not a customer to an imagery source, if you like. We're really trying to just make sure one of the key things is we have to be compatible with everybody's platforms, with everybody else's API, so that we make sure that we are as ingestible or as easy to work with as we possibly can. So that's why we're working with a lot of these guys to make sure that we are easy to layer in with their capability, because that makes it easier to work with us.
Okay, thank you. Next question. To help the community get more familiar with your data, are you participating in programs like the SpaceNet Challenge, or how about in partnership with the machine learning communities?
To date, what we are trying to do is look at every opportunity to socialize this sort of data, to get it into people's hands and get it used. So certainly look at all of those opportunities to really work with people who are developing algorithms, the application developers, if you like. So if you classify us as the data set, we will support the app developer community as much as we possibly can to help develop their apps so that they can then monetize the solution, including our data within that. So very happy to support those things. We know that in the grand scheme of things, this sort of data is quite nascent in the industry. So we're not the only people doing it, but it's very certainly early days. What we're trying to do is we were going to have to get it into as many people's hands as we can, and happy to take any suggestions that people have with regard how to make that happen.
Okay. Karyn mentioned a second cluster that was being built. How many concurrent clusters do you plan to have on orbit at any one time?
Where we are projecting is 10 clusters at a sort of maximum level, so that'll be 40 satellites altogether. However, I caveat that by saying we are reacting to customer demand. So if there is, as we sort of start to grow the business, if there is an increased requirement over a particular area that requires a much lower visit rate, and there is a budget to help pay for that data, then we will react to that. So this is nothing, if you like, is entirely fixed in stone. We don't need a certain number of satellites like a communication constellation might do. What we have to do is be able to deliver a reactive capability to the customer. So current model is 10 is a good number, but we are open to suggestions.
Okay, next question. Do you see the Kleos capability as being equally effective at supporting counter-drug and counter-piracy activity, or is it more suitable for one of these efforts over the other?
I can take that one if you like, Andy. Yes, I think the capability is as useful in that sort of policing role, if you like, or a Coast Guard role as it is in a defence role or indeed a commercial role. The ability to see over the horizon or to see shipping that's far away is a real key piece of information. And some countries are very short of that information. One country which is almost entirely dependent on fishing that I can think of has almost no capability to see over its horizon. So if you can bring in affordable capability to see further than that, then they can protect something that's so important to their people. So I don't think there's a user for whom this information is less important. It depends on how big their threat is, how much it affects their country or their company or the safety of their ship that they own. And that's how you measure the value of the information. Key is, though, that by doing this from space is we get wide area coverage, and we can see places where for any reasonable activity it would be impossible to see. So the data is just as valuable in those three key areas I talked about: defence and security, the regulators, and the commercial sector.
Okay, next question. What are the biggest epiphany moments or aha moments that you had while building this business or exploring the RF use cases?
That's a good question. I think that there's probably more aha moments than there probably should have been in a lot of senses. I think, one of the biggest ones was probably the size of the market, actually. I think, we saw this as a fantastic capability to deliver a really interesting data set, but always quite sort of niche and quite focused in its applications. And it's really, as we've sort of gone into that with that wedge end, that you see that actually those applications are just the thin end of that wedge. So you've got the ability to grow into a whole range of different marketplaces, and I think that's great. And not only the sort of marketplaces, but also the areas. So as Karyn reminds me on a regular basis, that I was quite skeptical about our sales ability within the US, and I think that was a sort of misstep by myself, that I really thought that we would be rest of the world focused, and in reality there is an opportunity for us in the US. And that's not to say that we pivot from one thing to another, but it just means that actually the scope or the growth of the marketplace is much bigger than I perhaps anticipated there. So I think that is fantastic. I think then from a probably negative perspective, I think that despite working in the space industry for a long time, the pain of launch delay with a very supportive investor community behind you is deeply hurt and deeply felt. And I think that is perhaps I perhaps underestimated the impact of those sorts of delays, if you like, at the beginning. So I think it's always a learning journey, definitely.
I think if I can add, for me, it was if I can use a slight analogy, it is said that when John Lennon and Paul McCartney wrote the song She Loves You, their first real Beatles hit, that they sat listening to the radio for 2 days in separate rooms because they couldn't believe they'd come up with a song and someone else must have done it. I think for me, it was a bit like this. When I first got involved in this capability, it was surely someone must already be doing this. And the fact they weren't, I thought was really interesting and added to the excitement of this business, because it's a capability that's so important and so needed.
Okay, we still have a bunch more questions. What geographic area, does most of the illegal maritime capability, illegal maritime traffic occur?
I don't know the answer to that question. It's you don't know what you don't know, I would say, and we know where the areas are which are of greatest interest, and they're the ones I described: the Mediterranean, the Gulf, and the South China Sea. But of course, there are people smuggling, particularly, for instance, happening all over the place. So the activities can be different. The illegal activities, when it comes to drug smuggling, might be happening in one part of the world. Where it comes to people trafficking, it might be another part of the world where it's the edge of war fighting, or perhaps under the cover war fighting and surrogate war fighting might be happening in a third and fourth part of the world. Key is the ability to see it and to look for it, and that's what space gives you. It gives the ability to look continuously over a wide area without interference from, in our particular capability, without interference from weather and other activities. So the more you can do, the more information you have, the more aware you are of where those key areas are. So we can take a judgment. We have to prioritize, because nobody with any sensor can cover the whole world all the time. What we do is add to that picture, so more of the world is covered more of the time.
Okay, I'm going to combine two questions for speed. How long after launch can your customers expect to receive initial data? Because I am sure you have a certain testing and calibration phase. And a similar question, are you open to having customers or partners participate in your initialization?
So the LEOP process is a number of weeks. There are some variables associated with that, which is until we're in space and starting to characterize the sensors, it's difficult to give you an exact number on that. But we will be doing early characterization very quickly in terms of a capability. And yes, 100%. Actively working with different partners during that phase as well, and looking for those early adopters, those people that are willing to help us refine the data product, help us make it better, and improve our capability as quickly as we possibly can. That is definitely the case. We are an inclusive, interactive, and very much a partnering-based organization, and positively encourage that at all times.
Okay. Has COVID-19 had any impact on the levels of illegal maritime activity?
I think we are we're expecting any of these sorts of events to have an impact on illegal activity, in the sense that where people become more desperate, where borders are closed, but where human activity still needs to carry on, we expect activity to happen. And so whether or not it's an increase or whether it's just an increase in illicit activity because people just don't want to be tracked, so they turn their AIS off, I think we would expect that. That's common across most events that occur. So I think that's certainly something we're expecting to see with regard to an increase. So yeah, that's a good question.
Okay, we have a couple questions talking about launch sites and saying if in these launch delays, is switching launch sites an option to increase or improve your timeline?
Not now, no. But there is, as there becomes an increased number of commercial launches available, as more launches come online in the next 12 to 24 months, then it will become more competitive. And actually, it's quite interesting that the cost of launch probably isn't the prohibitive factor at this moment in time. It's probably more the reliability or the ability to get into orbit as quickly as you can. So to have that reactive capability, the capability that means that within 3 months you can get launched, would be a fantastic place to be. So we positively encourage the handful of new entrants that will be coming on in the next 12, 18 months. I think that's going to be great for us as buyers. At the moment, it's a seller's market from a launch provider perspective, but I think that'll start to change in the next 18, 24 months, definitely.
Okay, second to last question that will be allowed. Is this classified as SIGINT or GEOINT?
I think it's this is GEOINT. SIGINT is detailed analysis and listening, and we are geolocating the radio transmission, which is open source.
Very good answer. Okay, and Peter, the last question is for you. Is it a British Harrier or a Tornado?
Neither. So all right, it is British, but it's not a Harrier or a Tornado. And if that's the last question, it is, for those of you who have some very old yellowing history books, it's a Blackburn Buccaneer, S2B for the real spotters out there.
Okay, there are several more questions that I have here, and Adam may be collecting others as well that we will get back to our audience with, but it is time for us to close our session. So Adam, back over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Karyn. Yes, we just wrapped up questions. I'll gather those questions. Thank you for everybody for participating on the panel. Karyn, especially for moderating it, and Andy and Peter for joining us and diving into who Kleos is and what's coming up ahead. That was very insightful. We're going to post this video on the Geospatial Frontier page in the next couple hours for everybody to review. And just like Karyn said, we're going to take some of the questions after the fact and hopefully provide some answers to it within the show notes. So with that said, I'm going to stop right there because I can have a habit of rambling on. So thanks everybody for joining us. This is Adam Simmons with the Geospatial Frontier Virtual Technology Fair, Project Geospatial, signing off.